on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My family betrayed me for my brother's son with my girlfriend. When they lost all their money and called me begging for help, my response left them in shock. Life seemed simple. At least that's what I thought. I was young, deeply in love, and had a well-defined plan. My girlfriend Ava and I had mapped out our future together. We were both studying at university with the determination to finish our degrees and then conquer the world as a couple. My parents gave me their unconditional support. They represented the image of the perfect family that attended church regularly. They were people who never missed Sunday service and who constantly talked about the importance of hard work and family values. They were certainly strict, but they were always available when I needed them, or so I thought. Ava and I had been in a relationship for 2 years. We met during our first year at university and connected immediately. We shared big dreams and aspirations. My plan was to get a stable job, eventually pay off my college loans, and maybe buy a house outside the city. I could clearly visualize it. Us, a dog, a family, the typical American dream. However, nothing had prepared me for the storm that was coming. One night, Ava told me she was pregnant. Her words hit me like a speeding train. I was left breathless. I wasn't ready for this. Neither of us were. We were still getting our lives in order. I had my own goals, and she had hers. But there was this undeniable reality staring us in the face. The following weeks were confusing. We talked for hours, evaluating our options. Ava wanted to have the baby. She was scared, but her heart had already made the decision. I couldn't blame her. I was scared too, but I supported her choice. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that we were about to start a whole new chapter. And this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about us as a couple. Everything changed the day I found out that my brother Josh had also been involved with Ava. I can still feel that blow to the stomach when she admitted it. She cried inconsolably with her face in her hands. She apologized repeatedly, but nothing eased my pain. My brother, whom I had always considered my best friend, had betrayed me. And not only that, but he was the baby's real father. I was left speechless. My whole world collapsed in that instant. How could he do this to me? How could she? I tried to understand, but it seemed impossible. Ava and I had been in a relationship for over 2 years. How could something like this happen? I called Josh. I needed to hear it from him directly. When I asked him about it, he acted like it wasn't important. Not once did he apologize. He just said it had happened and we should move on. Move on. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest. I couldn't process it. Not from him. And then there were my parents. When they found out about the pregnancy, they reacted with an eerie calm. Too calm. I remember my mother's reaction like it was yesterday. She looked at me with a blank expression and muttered something about divine plan. She said it was all part of a bigger picture, a test of faith, that we all had a purpose and we should accept it. My father, who had always been the strictest, simply nodded in agreement. They didn't even mention that Josh was involved. They brushed it aside as if it wasn't relevant. When they started talking about the family, that's when I lost it. They said I should support Josh, that this was our chance to show love and forgiveness, and that I needed to release my anger. It was all part of God's plan. That's what they said. My mother actually said that. And as much as I wanted to scream, as much as I wanted to tell them how they had failed me, nothing I said could make them change. They were so blinded by their faith that they couldn't see the damage this was doing to me. The next few days were chaotic. My parents kept pressuring me to forgive Josh, to help him. They tried to convince me that it was for the greater good. They asked me to be a better person, to rise above the situation. They claimed that I was the older brother, that I should set an example for the family. The hypocrisy was overwhelming. They mentioned that they had sacrificed so much for me, and that now it was my turn to make things right. The more they talked, the more I felt like I was suffocating. Now I saw it clearly. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built up in my mind for the future was slipping away. My dream of graduating, of living independently, of doing something for myself, it was all slipping through my fingers like sand. My life was not only being diverted, but was being taken over by the decisions of my family, by a betrayal I could not ignore, by a plan that was not mine. But then came the worst part. My parents turned against me. They didn't say it directly at first, but every conversation, every suggestion they made about how I should handle things felt like an attack. They had made up their minds. They would support Josh and Ava, and they expected me to fall into line. I told them I couldn't, that I couldn't support Josh after what he had done. I couldn't help with the baby. I had my own future to think about, and that didn't include solving my brother's problem. They didn't take my words well. My father was furious. He said I was acting selfishly and abandoning my family when they needed me most. My mother's voice broke as she begged me to reconsider. She said I couldn't turn my back on my brother, that this was a test of faith and that I would regret it. But nothing they said made sense. They had never held Josh accountable for his actions. They had never asked him to make amends. That's when it happened. The moment when everything changed. They threw me out of the house. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, just a cold and calculated decision. They told me I couldn't stay in the house anymore. They said they couldn't have me around if I was going to keep being so negative, so divisive. They asked me to leave and warned me that I would never be welcome back unless I apologized to Josh and accepted the plan. And that was it. They took my college fund. The money I had worked so hard to save and had entrusted them to look after. They used it to turn my room into a nursery for the baby. I felt my whole world crumbling. The room that was once full of dreams and hope was now being repurposed for a child that wasn't even mine. My future, my education, my freedom were being erased in favor of a problem in which I had no part. My parents insisted it was God's plan. They claimed it was all part of a higher purpose, but I couldn't see it. All I saw were the remains of what I had worked for, of everything I had believed in. They didn't even apologize. They just said it was the right thing to do. And they were right from their perspective. This was their path now, and I had to accept it. So I walked out the door. And for the next 3 years, I didn't look back. The first few weeks after I left were like a fog, as if my whole world had been completely turned upside down. I stayed with a friend for a while, sleeping on his couch, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. I hadn't planned it, but it was my only option. I had no home, no support system, and only my stubborn pride to cling to. I didn't want to feel sorry for myself, but that didn't stop the wave of resentment that washed over me every time I thought about how everything had fallen apart. I couldn't get my university funding back. I didn't have the money to take legal action against them. The worst thing was the silence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't part of my family's plans. I wasn't part of anything. No phone calls, no text messages, no dinner invitations. It was as if they had simply erased me. My parents, who had once promised me the world, had now closed their doors, treating me as if I were the enemy. Every time I tried to communicate with them, I got cold responses or conversations about the baby. They didn't even try to understand. All they cared about was Josh, Ava, and that baby. I wasn't even a footnote in their lives anymore. And Josh, he was present in every conversation. My parents talked about him constantly, about how he was shouldering responsibility, about how he was stepping up for Ava, about what a great father he would be. They acted as if nothing had happened between us. They acted as if I was the one who had betrayed them by refusing to help. It didn't matter that he had crossed the line in the worst possible way. For them, he was the one in whom they could place all their hopes. It didn't make sense. I had given everything to help them, to do the right thing. But when I needed them most, they turned their backs on me. And all for the sake of a child who wasn't even mine. It was a cruel joke. My whole life was being rewritten by people who didn't even care to hear my side of the story. They were too wrapped up in their plans to notice the destruction they had caused. I spent the next few months simply trying to survive. I enrolled in classes at a community college, thinking it was better than nothing. I worked part-time in a cafe, trying to make ends meet. I tried not to think about my past, about what my parents had done. But no matter how hard I tried, the anger always came back. The betrayal was always there. It gnawed away at me, reminding me of everything I had lost. But long after I had given up on ever expecting anything from my family, a number appeared on my phone screen. One I hadn't seen or thought about in years. For a moment I stared at it, debating whether to answer. My curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to accept. I brought the phone to my ear with almost clinical detachment. Her voice cracked through the line, weak and trembling. It was my mother. She uttered my name like a prayer, as if the sound alone could save her. I remained silent, letting the weight of her own despair sink her deeper. The silence seemed to make her nervous because she immediately began to explain. Her words stumbled over each other in a disorderly and incoherent flow. She told me they had lost everything. The house, their savings, all the stability they had once taken for granted. It had all gone. She said she couldn't fully explain it. Something to do with a failed investment and some vague mention of a scam. He said my father had been too proud to admit they were in trouble until it was too late. Now they were on the edge of the abyss, barely maintaining basic services, barely scraping together enough for food. He asked me if I was still there, his voice breaking under the weight of his own shame. I told him I was listening, keeping my voice deliberately even, detached. I wanted him to feel the distance they had created when they turned their backs on me. He continued with his words, faltering but persistent. He said he wished things had been different, and that he regretted how they had treated me. He begged me to come home, to help them, to be the son they needed now that they had no one else. I waited until his words ran out, until his pleas hung in the air like smoke in a closed room. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, almost analytical. I told him that it had been 3 years since they decided that they didn't need me. 3 years since they took everything I had worked for and gave it to someone who hadn't earned it. I told her that I spent those years climbing out of the hole they had thrown me into, rebuilding my life brick by brick, alone. And now, after all this time, I thought I could pick up the phone and undo all that with a few tears and a half-hearted apology. I didn't raise my voice. It wasn't necessary. Each word was like a scalpel, cutting through any lingering illusions I might have had about forgiveness. She tried to interrupt, but I wouldn't let her. I told her she couldn't rewrite history just because it suited her now. I told her I didn't mean anything to them then, and I didn't mean anything to them now. Her voice broke desperately. He asked me if I really hated them so much that I was willing to let them suffer. He said that they were my parents and that blood was thicker than water. I laughed. A sound that didn't even seem to come from me. I told him that they only seemed to care about blood when it was convenient, when they needed someone to clean up the mess they had made. Then I spoke the words I knew would hurt the most. I told her that I was just a simple human, incapable of understanding the divine plan. I said it with a sharpness that was sharp enough to draw blood, giving back her own sacred words. I reminded her of the countless times she told me to accept the divine will, to put aside my own feelings for the good of the family. I told her that if this was the divine plan, who was I to interfere? She should accept it just as she expected me to accept being expelled. She sobbed down the phone, begging me to reconsider. They said they were sorry, that they had learned their lesson, but I did not waver. I told her that their repentance was between them and their faith, not with me. I was not their savior. I was not their second chance. She tried to evoke memories of the past, of when I was a child, of the good times we shared. She said she had loved me then, that she still loved me now. I told her that love was not something you could turn on and off like a tap. I told her that love was not what they showed me when they threw me out of their house, when they stripped me of my dignity, took my money, and called it divine will. His sobbing became more intense and frantic, but I refused to let it affect me. I had spent too many nights crying alone, too many days wondering if I would ever feel whole again. His tears could not reach me now. They could not undo what had been done. I told him I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my money, not even my compassion. I told them that the choices they made had consequences, and it was not my responsibility to protect them from those consequences now that they were finally feeling their weight. I reminded him of the nursery they built in my old room, the one that was supposed to be for my brother's son. I told him to turn to him now, to the son they chose over me. If anyone should be stepping forward to save them, it was him. He begged me not to hang up, but I was done. I told him I hoped they found peace in their faith, the same faith they used as a weapon to destroy me, and then I ended the call. For a long moment, I sat staring at the phone in my hands. I expected to feel something. Anger, sadness, even guilt. But there was nothing. Just a cold, empty stillness. They had built this distance between us, brick by brick, and now it was impenetrable. I put the phone down and went back to what I was doing before the call as if nothing had happened. Perhaps that was what scared me the most. That their despair, their tears, their regret no longer meant anything to me. They had turned me into a stranger, and I had left them behind. Now there was no going back. Update 1. It was Josh who was calling this time. He began with a calm, almost carefree greeting. He said he wanted to talk. The moment I heard his voice, a flood of memories came back. Memories of the man who had played a part in the disaster that turned my world upside down. I felt my stomach tighten and my throat go dry, but I didn't let it get to me. I refused to let it. I asked him what he wanted, keeping my voice cool and cautious. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He said he knew the situation was complicated, but that wasn't the real problem. He told me he needed to explain something. He sounded serious, as if he had been saving these words for too long. As much as I despised this man, I found myself listening. Forgive me, but no matter how hard I tried to resist, I was still hoping for some show of responsibility, some kind of sincere apology. Josh continued to speak slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. He admitted that he had made a mistake. He said he didn't know how to handle everything, and that the situation had gotten out of control. He even said he was sorry, his tone softening as he said that he had never intended for things to get so bad. For a moment, I almost let myself believe him. I almost convinced myself that there was real remorse behind his words. But then the anger came back faster than I could control it. My voice trembled as I repeated the word, "I'm sorry," with obvious sarcasm in every syllable. Was that really all he had to say? Was he really trying to reduce everything to a quick apology? After everything they had done to me, their selfishness, their lies, their contempt for me, I couldn't believe it. I reminded him that his apology wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to being enough. He had taken everything from me. He had destroyed everything with one irresponsible act, and now he expected me to just accept his apology and move on. Josh didn't reply immediately. I could almost hear him thinking, searching for the right words to salvage the conversation. I didn't care anymore. He didn't feel true remorse. He just regretted being found out. He regretted that things hadn't worked out the way he'd hoped. His remorse didn't change the fact that I'd been left behind, abandoned by my own family. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, full of more emotion than I'd heard before. He told me he wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, that he wasn't asking for my money or for me to fix things for him. He said quietly that he was trying to make things right. For me, for Ava, for the baby. I could feel the weight of those words suspended in the air between us, but no matter how sincere he sounded, it didn't matter. I couldn't fix this. Not now. Not ever. I couldn't listen to anymore. I shouted at him to stop. I didn't want to hear anymore. This was about him and the damage he had caused, the choice he had made to hurt me and turn his back on everything we had once shared. Nothing I said could change that. Josh's voice trembled as he apologized again, sounding more desperate this time, but I was done. I'd heard enough. He could say, "I'm sorry," 1,000 times over, but it wouldn't undo the pain. It wouldn't repair the damage he'd caused. I told him I didn't want to hear it, and with that I hung up. Update 2. 1 week later. The phone rang again, 7 days later. This time it was a different name on the screen. Ava, my brother's wife, the mother of the child I had been kicked out to make room for. For a moment I hesitated to answer, but curiosity prevailed again. I wanted to hear what excuse she could possibly have for getting involved in this matter. His voice was soft, almost timid, as if he were walking on eggshells. He greeted me tentatively, saying he hoped I was well and that it had been a long time since we last spoke. I didn't reply, letting the awkward silence stretch between us. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Finally, he got to the point. He said that my mother had told him about the call the week before, about how things were bad, really bad. He said he understood why I was upset, but he begged me to think of my nephew. He said that he was innocent in all this, that he shouldn't have to suffer for the mistakes of the adults in his life. I could feel the anger starting to bubble up, slow and insidious. She had the audacity to call me and ask me to clean up the mess they had created, and now she was involving a child in this. I clenched my jaw, trying to contain the storm building inside me, but she went on. She said that my nephew admired me, even though we had never met. She said that he deserved the chance of a good life, and that if I could only find it in my heart to forgive them, it could make all the difference. I interrupted her, my voice slow and cold. I told her to stop. I told her I didn't want to hear another word about that child. I told her that if she thought mentioning the child would magically erase the years of pain and betrayal I endured, she was even more deluded than I thought. She stammered, clearly taken aback by my direct response. She said she wasn't trying to upset me, that she just wanted me to see reason. She said the family was supposed to stick together, especially in difficult times. That's when I lost it. I told her she had no right to lecture me about family, not after everything they had done. I reminded her how they threw me out like I was trash to make room for her and her son. I reminded her how they used my college fund to set up a daycare for the son of the man who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I told her that if she wanted to talk about family, she should look for my brother, the chosen one. Where was he now? Why wasn't he the one stepping up to fix the situation? She tried to defend him, saying that he was doing the best he could, that he was working hard to support his family. She said he was under a lot of pressure and that they just needed a little help to get back on their feet. I laughed, a bitter, cutting laugh. I told her that her husband had been selfish and irresponsible all his life, and I doubted that had changed. I told her that if she had married him expecting something different, that was her mistake, not mine. I told her that I owed nothing to her, or to him, or to their son. She began to cry, her voice breaking as she begged me to reconsider. She said she didn't know how they were going to survive, that they were on the verge of losing everything. She said she feared for her son's future and didn't know who else to turn to. Her tears only fueled my anger. I told her that if she was afraid, she should have thought about that before getting involved with my brother. I told her that she had made her choices. Now she had to face the consequences. I told her that her son's future was her responsibility, not mine. If she wanted to play the victim, she would have to find someone else to believe her sob story. She tried one last time, her voice trembling. She said she knew I was a good person, that deep down I still cared about my family. She said she believed I could find it in my heart to forgive them, for the sake of the child, if for no other reason. That was the last straw. I let the words pour out of me, sharp and cutting. I called her a coward for thinking she could use a child to manipulate me. I called her deluded for believing that I would ever forgive them. I called her selfish for expecting me to fix the mess her husband had made. I told her that she and my brother were perfect for each other, two people who took and took without ever giving anything in return. When I finished, her sobs were uncontrollable. She tried to say something, but I wouldn't let her. I told her to save her tears because they wouldn't work on me. I told her to tell my parents, my brother, and anyone else who wanted to listen, that she was done being their whipping boy. Before she could reply, I hung up. My hands were shaking, not with regret. It was the kind of anger that leaves a bitter taste in the mouth, the kind that burns long after the flames have died. I sat for a while, staring at the phone in my hand. I thought of the child she had mentioned, the innocent one she had tried to use as a bargaining chip. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but it passed quickly. That child was not my responsibility. It was not my problem. It was not I who had brought him into a world of chaos and instability. No, that was their fault. My brother, his wife, my parents. They had made their choices. They had destroyed their lives with their own hands. And now they were struggling to find someone to blame, someone to save them. But that someone would never be me. Update 3, 15 days later. When the call from the church came, I was surprised. I hadn't thought about them in years. Religion had been such a central part of my family's life growing up. However, it had always felt more like a tool of control than a source of comfort. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Pastor Daniel, someone I vaguely remembered from my adolescence. He said he hoped I remembered him and that he was calling to talk about my family. I braced myself, expecting the usual guilt or moral lecture. Instead, his tone was calm, measured, and surprisingly sympathetic. He said he wasn't there to take sides or pressure me into anything, but he wanted to mediate if I was willing to listen. He explained that my parents had come to the church desperate for help, and they mentioned our estrangement. He thought it might be worth trying to hear my side of the story before assuming anything. Something about his approach disarmed me. There was no judgment in his voice. There was no implied obligation. He made it clear that this was entirely my choice and that he respected my right to refuse. For the first time in years, I felt that someone was willing to really listen, not just preach. I accepted, but on my terms. I told him this was not going to be a sad story or a moment of reconciliation. If he was calling to facilitate a family reunion, he needed to understand the whole situation. He agreed and asked if I would be willing to share my side of the story. I started slowly, relating the events that had led to our estrangement. My tone was controlled, almost clinical, as if I were telling a story that had happened to someone else. Pastor Daniel listened in silence. His only responses were occasional murmurs of acknowledgement. I told him about the years that followed, the anger and the pain, the sense of betrayal that never completely disappeared. I described how I rebuilt my life piece by piece without them, and how their recent attempts to reconnect seemed to me to be nothing more than a desperate attempt to use me again. When I finished, there was a long silence. I could hear the faint crackle of the line as Pastor Daniel processed everything I had said. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was filled with something I had not expected: genuine understanding. He said he deeply regretted everything that had happened, that no one should have to endure such betrayal, especially from their own family. He said he hadn't realized the magnitude of what had happened. It was clear that my parents had only given him a partial version of events. He admitted that he had been prepared to ask me to consider forgiveness, but now he understood that this was not a simple matter of letting go of the past. He said that it was clear that my family's actions had caused lasting damage, and that forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be on my terms and in my time. Here was someone from the church, a representative of the same faith that my parents had used against me, acknowledging the damage I had suffered. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling, as if a weight that I had not realized I was carrying had been lifted, even if only slightly. I told him I appreciated his understanding, but made it clear that I had no intention of reconciling with my family. I explained that their recent pleas for help seemed to me like manipulation, not genuine repentance. I told him that I could not trust them to change, and I was not willing to expose myself to more pain. Pastor Daniel said he respected my decision and would not pressure me to reconsider. He said he believed that healing was a deeply personal process and that it was not his place to dictate how or when I should embark on that journey. He said he would continue to pray for me, not in the perfunctory, superficial way I had become accustomed to, but with sincere hope that I would find peace in whatever form it took, and for that he was grateful.